Okay, everybody, we are now, yeah, we are recording properly. I do apologize in advance for any noise. I have had my window up in my office because it's too warm. But one of my neighbors is doing construction work still. While it's mild annoying, it's not so much that it counts as a nuisance. That's for, we were talking about that in court on Tuesday. But today for EU law and for tomorrow, we're going to be finishing up looking at competition law. And this will bring us up to the end of the semester and at the end of the academic year. Excuse me. But when we're looking at this, we're going to be looking at we're going to be finishing off the idea of dominant undertakings or big monopoly firms in industries and the rules for them. And I've included some notes for the enforcement of Articles 101 and 102 TFEU, for how the Commission actually investigates this measure, looking at what they do, how the process goes about, as well as some fines and some examples of how they have done so in the past, before moving on to a slightly more in-depth look at the idea of undertakings. I have some additional notes on undertakings and the idea of substitutability. While we may not get to this tomorrow, the notes are up there, and they're just it's a round out and finish off the idea of EU competition law, just a full picture of what it is. And I just need something to keep my hands occupied because I still don't know what to do with them. That's the work. It's something smaller. But it is that question of what we're doing today is we're going to be looking at the dominant undertakings, looking at the abuse and the justifications of why they can be allowed. And these are the why they can be allowed bit is, we kind of touched on this before, that if you're just that good at business, if you are the Jack Donaghy of business, watch anyone who doesn't understand that, watch 30 Rock. It's an amazing show, and Jack knows business. But it's where you become the dominant figure, that you are arrive to the point where you are the dominant undertaking through no abuse of the process. It's just you're just that good at what you do. You have the best service, the best provisions, the best support networks, costs on the business side. You were just that damn good at what you do. You become the dominant figure. And what you do could be seen as abuse, but you're just really that good and you're just carrying out business as you would even if you weren't the dominant figure. And we'll be looking at that and some of the issues of how practical is that in real life. So when we're looking at Article 102 and the abuse of the dominant figure, we have to look at the actual meaning of what is abuse of the dominance, because if you're the big player, if you're the dominant figure, will everything you do be abuse? So if you're just that good at business, at what point are you just carrying out your activities? And the question then is it abuse if it's carried out by the non-dominant figure? Is there a difference between if it's anti-competitive, but it can be carried out by a non-dominant figure? Should that be allowed? Can you, as a dominant figure in an industry, carry out that activity without falling afoul of Article 102? And of course, we're looking at this in, again, the Hoffman and Roche case. So we're looking at the link between dominance of a market position and the abuse of a market position. And you can see there that the concept of abuse is linked as an objective concept relating to the behavior of an undertaking in a dominant position, where is such as to influence the structure of a market, whereas the result of the very presence of the undertaking in question, the degree of competition is weakened, and which through the recourse to methods different from those which condition normal competition in products and services on the basis of transactions and commercial operators, has the effect of hindering the maintenance to the degree of competition still existing in the market or the growth of that competition. So really it is the behavior becoming illegal of the standing actors within the market, since really the dominant figure has a special position or a special responsibility, as you can see there in the Michelin case, that they have to be a bit more careful of what they're doing, because they're the dominant figure. They will lead, they will control, they will shape the market, whether they're intending to or not. So they have to still be aware of this and make sure what their actions, if everyone else is doing it, and they're all effectively, so let's say the dominant market position has 60% of the market share, and its nearest competitors all have 10 to 15% each, and they never operate together. The dominant industry figure in the dominant undertaking then has to be careful of what they're doing, because while the smaller firms can engage in this anti-competitive nature to a lesser degree, they can't, because if they do, they will run afoul of Article 102. But you can see there, in United Brands, they're still entitled to defend their commercial interests, and it's to ensure that the dominant market figure isn't given unfair burdens. They're not penalized for just being that good at what they do, that they don't have to run a non-profit. If they're in an industry to make money, they can make money. They don't have to have additional terms or additional burdens on them to stop them being so successful if they're not abusing their dominant position. If they're just that good and they're a product that is just that well received, well regarded, well utilized, whatever, if they're just that outstanding, they can still defend their commercial interests. And you can see there in the European Melange Price case that Article 2 is not aimed at the practices which may cause damage. Is not only aimed at the practices which may cause damage to the consumers directly, but also at those which are detrimental to them through their impact on the effective competitive structure. So really, if you're not damaging the consumer or creating that detriment or to a competitive structure, if you're just being good at business, you're not going to run afoul of Article 102. And you can, because of this, you can, the language there in the case of Europe, Melange Ballage, they're looking at the exploitative and the exclusionary practices. That if you're exploiting loopholes, if you're exploiting your position as a dominant market position, if you're using your position as a dominant market figure to exclude competitors from the market, and we're looking at how they can actually do this in a second, then yes, that practice will be running afoul of Article 102. But if you're just taking advantage of the economies of scale you have, that you can produce so much more, your cost of production drops so much, you can just sell at a lower price than others. And you're doing that because you are producing so much. And anyone who studies economics or business will be able to understand that term a lot better than I could explain it. But it's just, if you can produce more, your overheads will lower. That it costs, your rent will be, or the premises cost will be the same no matter how much you produce. So if you produce more, the premises cost is spread across more products, easier to recoup your loss. And if you can produce enough and sell enough, the more you make, the more products you make, the cheaper it is for you to actually make them. And if you're not being exclusionary or abusive or exploitative, you're just good at business. And that's the ultimate end goal of business. But the ultimate end goal in most businesses now is to get bought by Google or Apple. But yeah, a lot of them, that is their end point, to get bought out by a large tech company. But they can be damn good at what they do up to that point. And we're going to be looking at the idea of some of the abusive practices under Article 102, looking at predatory pricing, refusal to supply, discriminatory pricing, and tying or bundling the product to other services. And we're going to be looking at how these are actually abuse of the dominant market positions. I'm just going to pause this for 1 second. Sorry about that. So the first one we're going to be looking at is the idea of predatory pricing. And this is excessive pricing which serves as a detriment to the consumer. That as a dominant market figure, you say, we are the best, we're the biggest, we are charging more because we can. There's no reason why we charge as much beyond someone's greed. And it is a question of who you are predatory pricing. And sorry, that's excessive pricing. Predatory pricing, we're looking where the pricing aspect is, sorry, user. The question of predatory pricing is looking at how the pricing can affect your consumer. So before, when I mentioned the example, if you can produce the good and you can sell at a lower cost than your consumer, than rivals, there is a limit of where this can actually exist as a business plan, and when it becomes predatory pricing. If you are the large figure in an industry, you're going to be able to have the supply, you're going to be able to have the economies of scale at a level your competitors may not. If you have, say, a market share of 65, 70%, and your nearest competitor has the next nearest competitor has market share of 20, and the rest is made up of smaller companies, you will be able to produce your good at a significantly lower cost, and then you'll be able to sell your product at a lower cost because your overheads are lower. But in doing so, you can sell it below the production cost of your rivals. And of course, we're looking at this in the Akazo case, where they're looking at how do they test this? How do you test where it goes from being able to sell a product cheaper to selling a product at a predatory price to the detriment, to the explicit, not explicit, but with the intention of it being of it outpricing and underpricing your competitors so they can't actually produce this good. And of course, looked at this in the Akazo case. They were looking at the two companies producing organic peroxides, and in this case, Akazo sold the peroxide for both plastic and flour markets, so multiple use. And the competitor had been active in just the sale of the peroxides to the flour market, but later it tried to expand into its sale for plastics. And to drive them out, then Akazo offered unreasonably low prices on the flour market, in the market where the competitor was established. So they were selling it at significantly low cost because they could produce at a significantly lower cost, produce the peroxides at a significantly lower cost than their rivals, and they could sell it at a lower price. And of course, we're looking at this and found the Akazo had a dominant position, and that not all of its pricing competition was legitimate. So while they could sell the peroxides on the flour market lower than their competitors, or at a lower price than it was, when you get to the point where you're producing it and selling it at a lower cost than your competitors can manufacture it, and you're intending to sell it as you flood the market effectively with the intention of having the two products being such a different price, consumers will always go for your product. You're creating a predatory pricing situation. And the courts had this test, and they made the distinction that prices below the average variable cost, which, that is to say, those which are very depending on quantities produced, by means of which a dominant undertaking seeks to eliminate a competitor, must be regarded as abusive. So again, this is that idea of economies of scale, where you can produce at a lower cost. A dominant undertaking has no interest in applying such prices except that of eliminating competitors, so as to enable it subsequently to raise its prices by taking advantage of its monopolistic position. Since each sale generates a loss, more so, prices below average cost but above average variable cost must be regarded as abusive if they are to be determined as part of a plan for eliminating competition. Such prices can drive the market undertakings, which are perhaps as efficient as the dominant undertaking, but which, because of their smaller financial resources, are incapable of withstanding the competition waged against them. So again, that's really what I was talking about, where you are abusing your position on the scale you can operate at to outprice your competitor. And it's just where you make your charging these prices to drive them out of business. And this, one way to combat this is that certain goods, while the Commission can investigate this, certain goods, certain industries, certain products have minimum unit pricing, that you cannot sell certain products below minimum price. And there is a controversy regarding the minimum pricing of alcohol. Should alcohol have a minimum price? There are health concerns that are trying to advocate that. But for other products, more essential products, they do have a minimum pricing requirement. And this might seem detrimental if they are essential products. So the likes of bread, certain food stuff, certain basic supplies needed for life, many of which we can't get at the moment because someone bought all the toilet paper. I joke, we have, because of the free movement of goods and the supply chains built up over 60 odd years of the EU, we have fantastic supply chains in Ireland. And we're existing within the EU. We are able to ensure that these supply chains continue, so we don't need to worry. If they're out of stock, if the product is out of stock at the moment, it's just that someone bought it all, it'll be back in tomorrow. But with these minimum pricing, it might be, as I was saying, it might be seen as restrictive or defeat the purpose of, if it's an essential good, why should there be a minimum price? Should we not be able to buy a loaf of bread for 10 cents, 1 cent, whatever the minimum price the company wants to charge that? And you can make the argument, yes, in the short term, that would be a benefit to the consumer. But by selling it at such a low price, many of the smaller industries that aren't many wouldn't be able to compete. So the larger supermarkets could start producing their own bread at such a scale where they can sell it for 10 cents, or the larger bakeries can start selling their bread for 10 cents a loaf. And they can operate at that scale, still make a profit, but smaller bakeries or even medium-sized bakeries wouldn't be able to, and they would go out of business. And it would reduce the amount of undertakings in the industry, so it reduces it down to 3 bakeries supplying all of Ireland, and they could all then just raise the price significantly, and the consumer would suffer from it. So that would be an example of predatory pricing. So there we're looking at the idea of prices below average costs are abusive per se, and the price between average total and the variable costs are abusive where they are part of the plan to shut down competitors. So you look at what is the cost, what is the average sale. When you look at America, when you look at the cost, this can be a bit clearer to determine, was that predatory pricing? Was that sold at such a low cost? But there may be a reason for a company to produce temporarily products at rock bottom prices. They could be moving out of that undertaking. They could be clearing their stock, and it's cheaper for them to sell it at a low price to clear it rather than have it go not being used or selling it to a competitor. But then that would be temporary, and that should be okay. So that is one example. You have to be aware of the circumstances, and the Commission can investigate these. We'll be looking at can investigate these circumstances where they need to determine, was there predatory pricing. Stop for 1 second. There's a pause. There's something happening outside. So with predatory pricing, that's just one example. Next is, if this works, is a question of refusal to supply. And so the idea of refusing to supply goes to how contracts between the dominant undertaking and suppliers and the industry as a whole work. And the general principle is, for contracts as we would look at, is anyone is free to enter into any contract they want, allowing the party to reject an offer if they want. But what happens if they're dominant undertaking? If you don't have a choice, you don't really have a choice with the suppliers. If the dominant undertaker is the leading supplier and they're putting out very unfair terms of the contract, or they're refusing to supply, how does this work for abuse of the dominant position? And in this case there, chemical solvents, the courts were looking at the producer of raw materials had decided to expand its business to manufacture finished products as well as the production and supply it was doing. And to do so, it decided to cut off supply to certain markets because they needed the products themselves. They needed the raw materials themselves, and they refused to supply to individuals and undertakings they had previously supplied to. And the courts held that an undertaking being in a dominant position as regards to production of raw material and therefore able to control the supply of manufacturers of derivatives cannot, just because it decides to start manufacturing these derivatives in a competition with its former customers, act in a way as to eliminate their competition, which is in this case, which in the case of the question is would amount to the eliminating of one of the principal manufacturers in the common market. So that's what they're looking at, because they were entering into that market themselves. They were altering and severely restricting the ability of fair competition, and they were shaping uncompetitive markets because they were refusing to supply their raw materials to future competitors, which from a business perspective can make sense, that you are not supplying your competitors at the expense of yourself. But because they were the dominant position, they were the largest suppliers and they were supplying to large industries within the common market, this is having significant knock-on effects. So of course we're looking at the facts, and was this a violation of Article 102? And they were looking at it, yes, really it was. And this reasoning was confirmed in Radio Television Éireann case. And this is one of the cases looking at the production of TV weekly guides. For anyone who doesn't know what these are, you can get them in newsagents still, but they were guides to show what was going on for the following week for television. This is before we had the internet, really. We had text, if that anyone wants to look up what that monstrosity was. But it would show you what was on, what show, what channel, what time, and a bit of a synopsis. At this time, each television station published its own guide, and so in Ireland that really wasn't that much, but two or three guides. Each station published its own guide while licensing daily newspapers to produce these listings. And McGill saw an opportunity to that if they created one publishing magazine, they could just corner the market, saying this you don't need to buy or read all the different sources. This is just everything compiled in one. But they were prevented from publishing this guide by the Irish TV stations that the courts at the time considered to be an abuse, a violation of Article 102, that they were refusing to supply the information required, that the stations were not telling the future publisher what was going to be on in advance. And it prevented the appearance of a new product on the market that a dominant undertaking did not offer and for which was a potential consumer demand. So there was demand, and this did eventually go ahead. And looking at this idea of what is the goal of potential consumer demand, what is consumer benefit, it made sense for people to have one magazine where they could read the weekly TV guide, as opposed to having to get multiple newspapers to get different channels, different stations, and how this works. But in the Bronner case, you're looking at that the dominant undertakings don't have to make their facilities available to other undertakings who would be going on to develop in public interest or public policy or public benefit products. And they were looking at this, that the CJEU restrictively held that only where the service provided by the dominant undertaking was indispensable, if it was impossible to develop new businesses without it, and only in exceptional circumstances would the CJEU force such a service to be made available to other companies. So they were taking a bit of a restrictive approach because they didn't want to go too far, and the courts weren't there to police business regulation. That's not what they were there. They're there to make sure that Article 1 and 102 aren't abused or aren't violated, but they're not there to ensure business practice on an ongoing basis. Excuse me. It's a dry cough, don't worry. But they were reluctant to do so. And it was, of course, will still look at refusal to supply. The next one then is discretionary pricing. And discretionary pricing is discriminatory pricing. It's mentioned in Article 102 that the dominant undertaking will charge different prices depending on the different nationality of its consumers. We saw this in the United Brands case, which is direct discrimination. Or it can be an indirect discrimination by the offering of discounts or rebates where you get money back for completing or sending back the packaging for whatever reason. And of course, we're looking at this in, again, the Hoffman and Roche case. So if you have an interest in EU competition law, this is a case you really have to read. It's an interesting enough case itself, but it's just if you like this area, and if you want to go into postgraduate studies or do something with that and look at EU competition law, it's a big case. There are many lecturers within DCU who look at this area, and if you do want to go into postgraduate studies, if you want to do a master's or something along those lines with that, get in touch with them. They might be able to steer you a bit better than I can, because they look in that area a little bit more. But if you have any questions about it, you can also email me afterwards, and I'll do my best to help out. But in this, they were looking at the idea of, in the Hoffman and Roche case, they were looking at how loyalty rebates, so membership programs, which offer lower prices conditional upon the promise of buying exclusively from them, were indirect discrimination. Now, you were getting a benefit, but it required you not to buy from the competition. And this fealty rebate, unlike other quantity rebates, was exclusively linked with the volume of purchases from the producer concerned is designed through the grant of financial advantage to prevent customers from obtaining their supplies from competing producers. So it is shaping and controlling competition by giving you a discount, and that could be the discount on itself for quantity. We've all done that. Buy 10, get one free. That could be fine. But by linking it to buy 10, get one free, and only buy from us, that's where that issue comes into effect. And that's what the courts were looking at. And the courts went on to say that further to the effect of the fidelity rebates is to examine dissimilar conditions to equivalent transactions with other trading partners in that two purchases pay a different price for the same quantity of the good of the same product, depending on whether they obtain their supplies exclusively from the undertaking in the dominant market position or have several sources of supply. So again, the question is the idea of buy from us and no one else. We can give you an extra discount, but if you don't, we're going to have you over the business barrel, as we would say. And then that goes to the question of how do we when we examine this, determine the question quantity rebates and loyalty rebates. If you're buying from one supplier because they can offer you the best quantity rebates, does that become a loyalty rebate, or does it have to be an explicit contract? And of course, we're looking at this from they do acknowledge that it is blurred, and they kind of create a third criteria between the two. They see discretionary terms in practice and by their very nature itself anti-competitive. If this is just buy 10, get one free, or if you buy from us next time, you'll get a discount. That can be okay. But if it's buy from us for the next year and we give you a 10% discount on a product you would be buying a lot on, say, a monthly basis, that will be having anti-competitive effects, and it will trigger Article 102. So the courts are looking at that, at the actual practice in question, because on quick glance, quantity and loyalty, they kind of, if you're buying a lot from one place, you'll buy a lot from them often. But are you buying that because you're getting the discount for being loyal, or getting the discount because you're buying so much? So they have to look at the actual practicality of it. The last one then is the idea of tying or bundling, and this is in the Tetra Pak case there. You can see. It's very much linking the sale of similar products to others. And in this case, these would be two related or similarly usable products. And in this case, they tied the sales of carton filling machines to cartons of the former that they were selling. That's claiming the sale of the two were laddered. That to buy the filling machines, you buy the carton. With buy the cartons, you buy the filling machines. And the courts held that since the cartons could be used with other machines, this was a type of bundling and creating a distortion of competition. And it wasn't because that they were the only two, the machine could only be used with the cartons and the cartons could only be used on the machines. They were just saying that they had to be used, but the Tetra Pak cartons themselves could be used in other ways. And it was, of course, held that no, because of this is a abuse of a dominant market position. From a more relatable aspect, I'm going to say is if you drink those disposable coffee pods, do you have to buy the brand of the machine every time, or can you get generic versions? Or is it that you have to buy the coffee machine and the coffee pods every time? That's the type of bundling is in question. That you have to buy the machine because generics don't work, or our coffee pods, our machine doesn't work with generics, or our coffee pods don't work on other machines. And that's where the tying or the bundling aspect comes in. If you're buying coffee at the scale where there could be abuse of a dominant market position, maybe you're trying to finish your PhD, that can actually come up. Okay, so the last bit we're going to be looking at today, just I'm conscious of the time, and we're just going to think about it, is the idea of the objective justifications for the dominant undertaking. So this is where really that idea of you are the big business. You are just that good at what you do. You can offer a lower price. You can offer a better product. You can offer better quality of service while not abusing the position. And we're going to be looking at this where the courts, while Article 102 is an absolute prohibition on the abuse of the dominant undertaking, the courts do examine whether there's an objective justification for this. And the special person is a special context where there's a crisis in the industry leading to general supply shortage and pretty much just crisis. Supplies aren't available. That the dominant firm can refuse non-traditional customers because they're not buying from them. They have their normal customers who would normally buy, say, 100,000 units of product X and 200,000 units of product Y, and they know that they need this quantity every month. There's a crisis leading to a shortage. They can sell to their traditional customers in those quantities without it being a restriction of supply. But this crisis must be beyond the control of the undertakings, and it must be impossible to divert by other means. So really, if there's a short-term crisis, and continue your business as normal, prioritizing your existing customer base because they were there before the crisis and they'll be there after, that is an abuse of the dominant market position. But if you create that crisis, that is abuse of the dominant market position. And I'm sure we can think of a crisis right now where an industry leader is changing how its supply works. By manufacturers of N95 masks by refusing to supply to non-critical needs wouldn't be abuse of a dominant market position. If they're deciding to supply to medical boards, health professionals, and the sort at the moment, as opposed to individuals who are trying to buy it in bulk, that's not abuse of the dominant market position. That's just business. I even say it's common sense because people don't need to be buying them in bulk. But that's just one example. There's also the health and safety aspect in relation to this. So we're looking at this now. You have the suppliers. That's kind of what we're looking at now. The second one is, as I've been harping on about the entire time, is efficiency. You're just that good at what you do. And this was in British Airways. The exclusionary effect arising from having such a system which is disadvantageous for competition may be counterbalanced or outweighed by the advantages in terms of efficiency, which also benefits the consumer. If you're that good and your product itself is that good that you are the dominant figure, you're offering a cheaper, better, faster, harder, daft punkier product. That's not going to be abuse of the dominant market position. That's just going to be damn good at what you do. Now, if you get to that position and start substituting your product for lower quality, more expense, then you become a dominant market figure abusing that position. But if you stay on track, if you say we're selling a cheaper, more affordable, more user-friendly, better product as a whole, that would be fine. Because the consumer is still benefiting by getting a better, cheaper product. It's not the dominant market undertaking's fault. Their competitors aren't as good as them in this regard. And you can see there in the Microsoft case, this is actually the longest case in the CJU. It's 1,373 paragraphs. And be glad we're doing this topic now, because last year when I did it, when I was teaching competition law, I taught it earlier in the semester. I made the class read this case. I made it very important to read this case because it was they weren't doing the work. But I made them read this long case. It is interesting as well. But the court's here to accept that the theoretical exercise of an objective justification can exist. That if you are that good at what you do, if you provide that good of a product, the court's saying, yeah, we can kind of allow this justification. But in this case with Microsoft, they hadn't actually justified. They hadn't actually shown they existed in that position where they were showing such a fantastic product at such a cheaper price. It's just blowing the competitors out of the water with what they do, that they were just that good. That while it does exist in the facts of the case, they didn't show they were that good, and Microsoft got pulled up on this. So you can see there the legal parameters of the second line of justification are quite vague, that you have to be able to show you're just outstanding in business, but of course aren't really business practitioners. So it can be kind of an issue. And yeah, it's something the courts have to look at. So I'm going to stop the recording now. Tomorrow we're going to be finishing up the idea of competition law. We're going to be looking at how enforcement works as well as some provisional notes. and some recap of the entire semester. So if you have any questions about what we covered, or if you'd like anything cleared up, especially with the exam coming up, just let me know and we can arrange that for tomorrow. Okay, see you all then.